Have you seen the memes? Have you seen the memes about me? Posting them should be a crime.
The creation engine has been a hot topic for the Bethesda games community for seemingly a really long time. There were calls that the original iteration, the Creation Engine 1, was beginning to show its age with Fallout 4, and with us still looking toward the Elder Scrolls 6, the questions seemed to be louder than ever before. Despite us getting a look at the Creation Engine's second edition with Starfield, none of the questions around the engine had been answered by that game, and it took another title made in a completely different engine to change the script a little. Oblivion Remastered. This game flipped the conversation on its head in my opinion, and Bethesda's Creation Engine problem isn't what most people think it is. I'm not here to tell you that the Creation Engine is a hellish construct destined for the scrap pile. I'm not here to just dump hate on it. No, I actually think sticking with it could prove to be the right move. Could. But to understand my perspective, we also have to understand the history of the Creation Engine, and why Bethesda are so attached to it in the first place. So strap in for a Bethesda history lesson as we look at what I think to be the real issue with the Creation Engine.
You dork. Go back to the chess club. Who's laughing now? Yes, I was in the chess club.
Now, the Creation Engine can trace its origins to a much older one. You see, the first Creation Engine was made prior to the development of Skyrim, and saw further use in both Fallout 4 and 76. But, of course, Bethesda made games before this. For its 3D games, essentially Morrowind and beyond, Bethesda used a heavily modified version of the Gamebryo engine, which was initially released in 1997. This is the engine that the Creation Engine is based on, and I assume why you see many state that the engine is heavily outdated, not just Bethesda's design principles, as it can still trace some of its design to this engine made in the 90s. We'll get into why this problem is exaggerated, the engine issue, not the design issue, and also note that when Morrowind was made, the Gamebryo engine was called NetImmerse, a name it had until 2003, so if you do some research of your own and you look up Morrowind and see that it has a different engine name, this is why. Gamebryo continued to serve Bethesda during the development of Oblivion and Fallout 3, and was then rented out to Obsidian so that they could make New Vegas. Note that Gamebryo was a third-party engine, similar to what Unity and Unreal Engine is now. However, as the version Bethesda used was heavily modified, when the development of Skyrim came about, Todd and crew decided to go proprietary. This led to the Creation Engine's use in Skyrim and beyond, and while there were upgrades to the engine here and there, Bethesda decided to give their workhorse a sequel, leading to the engine used to create Starfield. The problem is, many had already called the first Creation Engine outdated by the time Fallout 4 came around, and its sequel engine did little to alleviate those fears when Starfield came along. Yeah, the Narn might look good, but the rest of the game didn't exactly impress visually or even technically, for that matter. It doesn't help that Baldur's Gate 3, another massive RPG in a proprietary engine called Divinity 4, looks leagues better, and was released in the same year, largely outperforming Starfield. At least in terms of public perception, but visuals aren't usually why people play Bethesda titles. While I've put so many mods into my game to make it look reasonably modern, it shouldn't be forgotten what vanilla Skyrim looks like. Bethesda games have always sat in this weird zone where they don't push the boundaries visually but have sometimes interesting art styles. I guess they can look kinda ugly at times, but that's the charm of it, and while this isn't an excuse to make bad looking games, art design is always more important than graphical fidelity, and I will die on that hill. The success of From Software's many titles is an example of this. It's not like Elden Ring's graphical fidelity is anything to write home about, but it still looks damn pretty. In my opinion, while Starfield has technical issues that you can associate with an engine that's probably undercooked, it's not like the engine is really the game's main problem. A general lack of creativity is, and you can see it in the game's visual design. It's just not very interesting to look at. Sure, the graphical fidelity is underwhelming as well, but that's always been the case with Bethesda, even in its heyday. The original Oblivion looks like that. God, was it always this bright? Is this what colour looks like in games? And for context, it came out in 2006, the same year as Gears of War 1 and Half-Life 2 Episode 1. Skyrim came out in 2011, the same year as Crysis 2, Arkham City and Uncharted 3, all of which have by far superior graphical fidelity. But people didn't really care about that in 2011. Again, they don't look bad for their time. They just don't look great graphically speaking, and that was fine, because they still had strong art design and were interesting to look at. So why is the Creation Engine 2 even that big a problem for Bethesda if the studio has shown it hasn't really ever cared for trying to break boundaries with visual fidelity? That's usually GTA's job. Well, while graphics are one thing, scale is something else entirely, and the Creation Engine 2 clearly isn't going to cut it for the Elder Scrolls 6.
But we're also building toward the game after that, and it's the one you keep asking about.
So, the Creation Engine 2 simply isn't powerful enough for Bethesda's plans for the Elder Scrolls 6, and this isn't an opinion of mine. This is the thought process of Bethesda itself. You see, while the Creation Engine 2 has only been used for one game thus far, Starfield, and this will more than likely be the case for the future, Todd and his gang are already looking to move on and upgrade the engine to its third iteration. You don't have to take my word for it though. Here it is, straight from the mouth of our Lord and Saviour.
Several years bringing Creation Engine 2, which powers Starfield, up to Creation Engine 3, that's going to power Elder Scrolls 6 and beyond.
So the Creation Engine is getting a much needed upgrade. Great, right? Well, there are some issues with this too. Making a game engine is not easy, and this is why so many developers have turned to using third-party engines over the years. Unreal 5 is the most obvious, something we'll talk about later, but there's also Unity and the one that I'm currently learning a little of, Godot. It can be an expensive process, especially if you want to make a massive RPG like the Elder Scrolls, and that is probably why A. Starfield took so long, and B. why the Elder Scrolls 6's earliest release date is somewhere in 2029, and that is very optimistic on my part. Starfield was very expensive, with numerous sources throwing around a $200 million budget, and I wouldn't be surprised if this included making the Creation Engine 2. Remember, Starfield was announced in 2018, and from what I can tell, began active development in 2015, straight after Fallout 4, releasing in 2023, meaning an 8-year development cycle. This is also from active development, and it seems brainstorming for the project started far earlier. In a 2018 interview with the infamous Jeff Keighley, Todd mentioned that the idea for Starfield began maybe 10 years ago, so 2008, giving you an idea of how long it took to go from concept to the final product. And here's the proof.
Think about that. Something like Starfield, we thought about that for at least 10 years.
Right.
Conversations, it would be like this, we could do this, we could do this. So they're very long, it's a long process.
So again, I wouldn't be surprised if Todd realised the Creation Engine 1 wouldn't cut it for Starfield early on, and got people working on an upgrade, maybe during Fallout 4's development or maybe after, leading to its very long development time. You also have to pair this with COVID disruptions, and you have a recipe for a very, very expensive dish. Still, the Creation Engine 2 is only being used for one game, from what we can tell, and this is a big problem for the finances. Sure, Microsoft have cash to burn, but throwing money at a problem doesn't always help. It's also concerning that Bethesda already have to make a new engine, and while I'm glad for it, it does show a concerning level of competency when it comes to making tools. I think using Capcom as an example will help to illustrate my point. You see, Capcom made their own game engine too for the 2017 banger Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, practically the game that started their new golden era. As long as we pretend that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite doesn't exist. Now this game, and every game since then, from Capcom uses this engine, the RE engine. And while I'm pretty sure it has received many updates to keep it going, Capcom haven't made the RE Engine 2, despite still being ambitious with its titles. RE Engine games are still some of the best looking around, especially with its human characters. I mean, just look at the renders for the Resident Evil 9 cast. Capcom didn't make one game with this engine, it made loads, and I mean loads, and this is typically what makes an engine worth the money. Every game you make with it makes its production more worthwhile, but the RE engine also proves another point. Optimization isn't purely because of the engine, it's more about the people using it.
What the f is this piece of shit?
The RE engine has been stretched to many different titles and looks. You go from the realism of the Resident Evil series to the stylized aesthetic of Street Fighter 6, and due to Capcom's size, these different IPs are often handled by different teams. The reason I bring this up is that the RE engine was behind well-optimized, refined titles like Resident Evil 7, 8 and 9, but was also used for the mess that was, or still is, Monster Hunter Wilds. The Monster Hunter team has been known to struggle with optimizing the mainline games on PC, with Monster Hunter World having its share of issues, especially with its expansion Iceborne, which used to delete saves. So even with a great proprietary engine that has garnered much praise, like the RE engine, you're still going to get problems if your optimization team isn't up for the task. Now, granted, the creation engine has kinda become famous for being pretty buggy. Because Bethesda don't make many games, and it isn't exactly the most polished developer around, there hasn't been proof against this for the creation engine. But I do want you guys to realise that if Bethesda made its own engine and things are still buggy, there is a massive chance it's not going to be helped by another engine. I'm not convinced this is the reason why Bethesda games are so messy. They're messy by their very nature. They're made by Bethesda. They're a messy developer. The problem is, as we've said before, making an engine just for one game is essentially a financial dud, and we can look at another massive Japanese developer for an example of the kind of mess it could put Bethesda in if they don't stick with the creation engine going forward. Square Enix. Square Enix is strangely comparable to Bethesda in that the golden age is well and truly over, and both developers are famous for their massive RPG series, except there are obviously way more Final Fantasy titles than Elder Scrolls ones. Either way, Square made the Luminous engine, and when it was first introduced to the world in 2012, it was meant to be the future of their games, but this never really came about. It was used for Final Fantasy XV, but not for Kingdom Hearts 3, Final Fantasy XVI, or the numerous Final Fantasy VII remakes. Now, Final Fantasy XV was famously in development hell for a very long time, although this was from more than just the engine. The game we got in the end is nothing like the original concept, and even its name changed, going from Final Fantasy Versus 13 to Final Fantasy 15. But this isn't a Final Fantasy video. Anyway, to try to justify all the money that was used to make the Luminous engine, Square made Luminous Productions, a studio specifically using that engine to make games, and things initially looked interesting when this tech demo came out in 2019. I mean, just look at it. Look at the way the skin's moving, it was really impressive. And then they made Forspoken. You know, sometimes the world writes its own comedies. And the entire Luminous engine situation ended up being a financial hole for Square Enix, because they only made 2 games with it. Granted, Forspoken is quite possibly one of the worst written things of all time, but it did look pretty. I think if Forspoken doesn't prove that graphical fidelity isn't that important, nothing will. While it's not quite as extreme with the Creation Engine 2, because it's an upgrade and not something made from scratch, it only got used for Starfield, with Bethesda moving straight to the 3rd iteration. That's not a great look for the Creation Engine 2, since the RE engine, which we talked about before, has been making games since at least 2017, and has been used as recently as Resident Evil 9 Requiem, which came out earlier this year. And the situation is making the development of Elder Scrolls 6 both more expensive and longer. It's really inefficient to make an engine for one game, and yes, again, I know the Creation Engine 2 is an upgrade, but it should be more like the difference between Unreal Engine 4 and 5, theoretically anyway. Still, with Luminous Productions now dead and buried, Square Enix is now using Unreal for its games, and the question arises of whether Bethesda should do the same. Well, Oblivion Remastered gave us a bit of an answer.
Remember me, and remember my words. This burden is now yours alone. You hold our future in your hands.
Unreal Engine, specifically its 5th edition, has been controversial, many associated with poor optimization, although as someone who has used Unreal Engine 4, I think this is also due to the engine's accessibility. It's like a multi-tool, a prefab house in a way. It has everything you need to get started, but because there's so much in the engine to do that, optimization can thus be quite tricky. When I used Unreal Engine 4 for a university project, I made an isometric indie title and sometimes felt like I was fighting the engine. This means that you can get an Unreal game that can't run on a NASA computer, but you can also get one nearly perfectly optimized that ticks all the boxes. Now, Unreal Engine 5 games tend to require some pretty meaty hardware, but an example of a game that's well optimized at launch was Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a game so good that even Bethesda acknowledged it for its achievements with its artwork. This illustrates the same issue that I mentioned with the RE engine, where the engine is only as good and well optimized as those using it. And that's sort of the problem with Unreal Engine. Almost anyone can use it to some capacity. Seriously, I'm not joking, I've used a little bit of Unreal 5, mainly Unreal Engine 4, but it's free, and if you guys right now just download it and look up a handful of tutorials, get a feeling for how nodes work, which are basically advanced flowcharts that you can work out with some basic knowledge of pseudocode or algorithms, you can start fiddling around right away. You don't even need to know how to code to make a game in Unreal Engine. Clair Obscur proved that too. Thus, Unreal 5 becomes a double-edged sword. It becomes an effective, easy-to-learn tool in the hands of great developers, but a bike that always has its stabilizers on for those who don't have deeper knowledge. Still, because of its easy-to-access nature and what Unreal 5 games look like by default, which is super shiny, many called for Bethesda to use it for its games. And then it did for Oblivion Remastered. Now, Oblivion Remastered is sort of Bethesda's version of a Blue Point game, the PlayStation studio that used to develop remakes of classics that play nearly identically, but look super pretty and super shiny. For context, Oblivion Remastered was largely developed by Virtuos, with consulting from Bethesda, at least from my understanding. And these guys are meant to be Unreal Engine experts. Virtuos are known for partnering with developers and publishers for projects, with an example being the Metal Gear 3 Solid remake, where they partnered with Konami, also using Unreal 5. The problem is, Oblivion Remastered and Unreal 5 didn't exactly fix the buggy mess issue Bethesda have always had. Now granted, Virtuos were the ones largely behind this, but I found Oblivion Remastered a painful experience. It ran okay, but I have a pretty meaty PC, and I couldn't do the arena quest beyond a certain point, and every time I went to use the pause menu, the entire screen shrank. Actually, it runs worse than my modded Skyrim, and my modded Skyrim has 3,000 mods in it, so do with that what you will. I also don't think the remaster really captured the charm of Oblivion visually. The graphical fidelity was great, the environments objectively look very impressive, but it just seems to miss some of that Bethesda visual charm that you can't really quantify. Like Fallout 3 being weirdly green or the original Oblivion being super saturated. Plus, it was 125GB for a game that's the same size as the original Oblivion, plus its DLC in terms of scope. And this is another issue with Unreal Engine games. They aren't exactly space efficient. In short, this game essentially proved that Unreal 5 wouldn't fix Bethesda's buggy mess issue, and I'd probably say that this is the worst optimized of the lot. But I don't want to sound like a straight Unreal Engine hater. I have used it a little bit after all, so it's a tad hypocritical from me. The real question is, why is everyone switching to Unreal Engine, and what's making Bethesda stick with the Creation Engine setup?
And one of the great things about having a fully dynamic game engine is all of this just works.
You might be looking around, seeing the likes of CD Projekt Red switch to Unreal Engine 5, and even after Oblivion Remastered, think Bethesda should do the same. CDPR jumped ship from its proprietary engine, the Red Engine, real creative name there guys, which it used to make Cyberpunk 2077. Now, as good as that game is now, and it's very good, it was a mess at launch. Well, mess is probably an understatement, so you might be thinking that the Unreal Switch will stop launch issues like that. Although, I blame CDPR breaking promises more than anything else with the issues that Cyberpunk had. With how good The Witcher 5 looks visually thus far, and damn, it does look very good, Bethesda fans might be tempted to convince Todd & Co to follow suit, since that is what Unreal 5 does best. High graphical fidelity, but there is a laundry list of reasons as to why Bethesda will, and probably should, stick with the Creation Engine. The first is simply because it's what Bethesda is familiar with. Unreal Engine may be easy to use and learn, but if you've got loads of people who already know how to use an engine or style of engine, you will save time and thus money. It's also a sense of identity, and the Creation Engine plus its predecessor Gamebryo has been a part of Bethesda's history for so long. It's a part of who they are, fundamentally, but what if you don't care about all of that? It's not exactly like Bethesda is the same studio it used to be, and it's not exactly like Todd's in a rush either. He's got that sweet Microsoft money to burn. Well, I've got one word for you. Mods. Bethesda has the greatest modding community in the world, and that's probably the coldest take I'm ever going to have. I don't feel like I have to prove it, but just look at my Skyrim. Look at the characters. This is a 2011 game, and we're not even talking about the likes of Fallout London for Fallout 4, Enderall and so on. This is, in large part, due to the Creation Engine and the Creation Kit. It's a lot easier to make a custom toolkit for your community to use if you're using your own engine, largely because you should have the people who made the engine to help. Also, if your third-party engine isn't open source, it can be a little messy and could require a lot of convincing to those that have made the engine. I also want to point out that Bethesda isn't the only example of this. Larian Studios made a toolkit for Baldur's Gate 3, and the community has run with it, even beginning a project to adapt Curse of Strahd. and it's difficult for me to put into words how excited I am for that one. There's also the Witcher 3 Red Kit, and even games without toolkits, but those that use proprietary engines, tend to have strong modding scenes. Crusader Kings and its Clawsverse engine, the Mount & Blade series and the many Capcom titles with their RE engine are all examples. The only Unreal Engine example I can think of that has a large modding scene anywhere near Bethesda's, and I'm being very generous here, is Hogwarts Legacy, which made an Unreal Engine 4 toolkit a while after its release, but it was a long while. This was perhaps proof that Unreal Engine could be a home for Bethesda's extensive modding scene, but why go with a could, when the Creation Engine has proven to be a great way to cultivate community-made content. More than that, the Creation Engine is built to do what Bethesda specifically wants it to do. It's not an all-in-one engine like Unreal, which can make practically any game. Well, practically any 3D game. If you're making a 2D game, people tend to stick with Unity, like Hollow Knight, whereas the Creation Engine allows Bethesda to simulate all these objects in that classic Bethesda way. It's the reason we can put baskets on merchants' heads to rob them blind. Ah, classic. Bellathor never saw it coming. Now, Oblivion Remastered did allow you to do this too, when it worked, and I think more Unreal Engine remasters and remakes will be on the cards for Bethesda, given the Fallout 3 remake rumours. Still, we have to look at the apparent direction Bethesda is going to, with a sort of back to basics outlook, returning to the formula that made their games so great in the past. Here's Todd's own words on the subject.
Yeah, in many ways, Fallout 76 and Starfield are a little bit of a creative detour from kind of that classic Elder Scrolls Fallout, a Skyrim or a Fallout 3 or a Fallout 4, Oblivion, where you're exploring a world in a certain way. And, as we come back to Elder Scrolls 6 that we're doing now, we're coming back to that kind of classic style that we've missed, that we know really, really well.
So, if you're returning to a classic style, it doesn't really make sense to do that with a brand new engine, and by new I mean new for Bethesda. Unreal Engine 5 has been out for a while, at least long enough to announce Unreal Engine 6. It's also interesting how Todd describes Fallout 76 and Starfield, calling them creative departures for the studio, which probably would have been more palatable experiments, or more forgiving ones anyway, if it hadn't taken so long to make Starfield, and in my opinion, this is what Bethesda's engine problem actually is. It's not a problem of lineage and code from the 90s, from the Creation Engine to Gamebryo. Even Unreal Engine 5 has a distinct lineage with Unreal 1, initially developed in 1995, and I truly believe that while Unreal has made gaming more accessible, developers making their own engines help to make more unique games. Specific engines are useful for making a specific type of game. It's why Supergiant Games, an indie studio, has its own engine for its isometric titles. Bethesda especially needs to keep that uniqueness that's helped it become the studio it is, or at least was, but it also really needs to make an engine that lasts longer. Making an engine for one whole game is not a good investment unless you're GTA 6, because that game's gonna cost $1 billion to make anyway, and making a new engine is just a drop in the ocean. Wait, hold on. Not $1 billion. $3 billion. Good lord. Anyway, in my opinion, this is a large reason for the development times of both Starfield and The Elder Scrolls 6, and while it sounds like progression is being made, with ES6 currently in some form of playable state, according to Todd anyway, if the Creation Engine 2 were up to snuff, we wouldn't have to wait for the Creation Engine 3 to get made, and we might even have ES6 by now. Damn, that was really some copium from me. So the real question is, why was the Creation Engine 2 not good enough for The Elder Scrolls 6 from Bethesda's perspective? I don't have an answer for you, because again, we only got Starfield out of the engine and I am not a Bethesda employee. The optimistic side of me says that the Creation Engine 2 was made to be hyper-specific, especially with the procedural stuff that was pushed in Starfield. With the Elder Scrolls 6 going back to this more classic style, maybe this specific nature means the Creation Engine 2 wouldn't work by design, leading to the Creation Engine 3. It's an inefficient workflow, assuming the Creation Engine 3 has had significant changes over its predecessor, but at least it's inefficient by design, I guess. I don't know if that's a better outlook. Bethesda moving on quickly could mean that the Creation Engine 2 just wasn't good enough as well. It wasn't made modern enough to power several Bethesda titles, as is the case with Capcom's RE engine, although Capcom's release schedule is light years ahead of Bethesda's. Now this is concerning because it's more about incompetency than it is about inefficiency by choice, although there is some good news. Todd did say that the Creation Engine 3 would power the Elder Scrolls 6 and beyond, meaning that it's hopefully good enough to have more than one game in it. Maybe it will power Elder Scrolls 6, then Fallout 5, which would be a marked improvement over the one game we got out of the Creation Engine 2. Todd said he and the team were happy with where the technology has taken them, although why would he say anything different, even if it wasn't true? Still, the hope is that Creation Engine 3 will be able to keep up with ambitions, and that the team behind it is actually ambitious this time around. It's more important for the team to know how to use an engine than how powerful the engine is itself. Again, From Software has proven this with a pretty old engine, the same used for Bloodborne I'm pretty sure, still powering the upcoming Dusk Bloods a dozen years later. Bethesda choosing the Creation Engine isn't the problem in my opinion. It's that the Creation Engine 2, a much needed upgrade, couldn't last longer than one game, and the production of the Creation Engine 3 has only slowed down the already slow development of the Elder Scrolls 6, something that was announced 8 years ago now. Here's hoping it's worth it, but the people behind the engine will always be more important than the engine itself. They will always be the limiting factor, and after the last decade, those people have a lot to prove. Thanks for watching this more general gaming video about Bethesda. I've seen a lot of people talk about how the Creation Engine isn't good enough and so on, but no one really talks about its production and how this has really slowed down development. Also, I don't think people really understand what game engines are. They're purely scaffolding to build on, while Unreal Engine can sometimes feel like a prefab house. The people are still the ones doing the building. It's not like the engine makes the game for you. The Final Fantasy VII Remake series uses Unreal Engine 4, and that includes the upcoming Part 3, and nobody harps on about how that engine is out of date despite Unreal 5 releasing fully in 2022. Unreal 4 was released in 2014, and those Final Fantasy VII Remake games still look really good. It isn't the engine as much as it is the design principles with Bethesda, and I guess the same applies to Square Enix too, and this is why I'm pretty worried, but I'm still going to maintain some level of ignorant hope until we see something from the Elder Scrolls 6, like a trailer or some gameplay. But while we wait, why not do the YouTube ritual of liking, commenting and subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you in another video.
Bells on